When I met Jiang Fuzhou again, he had just lost his wife. However, people of his stature don't call their wives that. They say princess. As the distinguished Prince Jiang, his wife's funeral was, of course, a grand affair. I attended the funeral with the emperor, but it was really just a formality, sitting in the hall, lighting incense, and that was enough to demonstrate the emperor's grace. Jiang Fuzhou knelt down to express his gratitude for the imperial kindness, his face calm and composed. I was disappointed. I had been curious to see what he would look like after losing his wife, especially since he hadn't even furrowed his brow when I died. After half a cup of tea, the emperor grew restless and wanted to leave. I suggested, "Since we've already left the palace, why don't we set off some fireworks?" The emperor was delighted, as fireworks weren't allowed in the palace except during festivals. We stood beneath the white lanterns of the Jiang residence, and the fireworks crackled and burst into the sky. It was daytime, so the patterns weren't very clear, but the emperor ordered a cartload of firecrackers to be brought in, and we kept lighting them until nightfall. Through the mist of the fireworks, I caught sight of Jiang Fuzhou. He lowered his head and asked the eunuch beside him, "Who is the lady standing next to the emperor?" The eunuch, already nervous from the many rumors about me, replied in a panic, "Your Highness, we mustn't ask about the Empress." Through the confusion of the fireworks, he looked in my direction. I opened my small fan and hid a particularly malicious smile behind it. When I first met Jiang Fuzhou, I was still a beast, complete with all 4 hooves. Bound by the talisman chain of the Grand Commandant, I was being escorted to the imperial palace. I had lived for 300 years and was revered as a deity by the people of Guling. I had some divine powers, but there were so many spells on that chain that I couldn't break free. I lay on the boat and whimpered, which was hardly dignified for a great beast like me. But the Grand Commandant had made it clear, my horn was to be cut off to cure the little prince's heart ailment. Wouldn't you cry too? Not wetting myself was already an act of great courage. It was then that Jiang Fuzhou appeared before me. At that time, the Grand Commandant and his men had stopped by the Zhan River to rest. They had caught such a rare and exotic beast that they had gotten drunk, dreaming all night of wealth and power. In the dead of night, Jiang Fuzhou cautiously approached me. He was still a frail, handsome young man then. At first, he probably just wanted to take a closer look at the royal totems on the cage. Then, by chance, the silk covering the cage slipped off, and our eyes met. A huge prisoner and a startled young thief, a very awkward situation. The white rhinoceros, emerging from the east of Guling, along the Zhan River. It looks like a cow, pure white as jade. Eating its horn can cure heart ailments. So, it's true, just like in the books. He recovered from his shock and murmured to himself as he gazed at me. To think that such a strange creature actually exists in this world. This bookish young man had a pair of gentle and kind eyes. He stared at me, so I cried and begged him to save my life. Just like in all the stories about scholars and demons, he agreed. The next day, when the Grand Commandant and his men woke up and found me gone, they were utterly devastated. They sent soldiers to search every inch of land within 100 miles, house by house. They even returned to Guling, burning mountains, poisoning rivers, and flooding villages, using every dirty and vicious method they could think of. But they never found me again. In fact, they had found me on the first day of their search, in a small wooden house by the river. That bookish young man named Jiang Fuzhou opened the door, polite and composed. The Grand Commandant glanced around the small wooden house and asked, "Is there anyone else in your house?" "My humble wife." He stepped aside, allowing the white-bearded Grand Commandant to see me, a graceful woman in coarse linen clothes. "Your wife is truly a beauty." The Grand Commandant quickly offered a polite remark and then left. The Grand Commandant always had more confidence in my beauty than I did. Before he died, he declared that I was a national calamity, saying I would bring chaos to the court like the infamous Daji and Meishi, ultimately leading to the downfall of the dynasty. I don't know if I will destroy this dynasty, but I certainly ended his life. Before he died, he wailed endlessly, saying that he had been loyal to the emperor and devoted to the country all his life, never committing a single wrong, never unjustly killing a good person. How could he end up like this? I thought for a moment and said, "You shouldn't have provoked a monster." Then I decisively pushed him into the snake pit, where countless venomous snakes eagerly embraced him. From that moment on, the court was silent, and no one dared to say a word against the Empress. I felt a bit lonely. Although the Grand Commandant wasn't a good person, he was the only one who knew where I came from and understood my deep hatred for this world. And he knew where that hatred came from. 10 years ago, in early spring, like in all monster stories, I stayed by the Jun River and became Jiang Fuzhou's wife. When we first got married, there was a famine. After starving for 3 or 4 days, I looked at my newlywed husband for a long time, considering eating him. Jiang Fuzhou also looked at me, weakly smiling, and pushed the last piece of cornbread to me, saying, "My lady, you should eat. After eating, you can return to Guling." Looking at his skinny frame, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I secretly cut off a large piece of meat, sold it at the market as pork, and exchanged it for a lot of cornbread, which I stuffed into Jiang Fuzhou's mouth. Eat. Beasts like us don't understand love and romance, but I thought, since I could bear to hurt someone I cared about, I must really love Jiang Fuzhou. We survived the famine, but later, when the war broke out in Beihai, Jiang Fuzhou wanted to join the Grand Commandant but struggled to find a way in. One day, he casually mentioned that the Grand Commandant had been hunting the white rhinoceros for years and that if he could present something from the white rhinoceros as a gift, it would surely open doors for him. I thought about it and cut off another piece of meat for him. I didn't want him to remain unfulfilled and melancholic. At that time, I didn't yet understand how strange humans are. It's not that when you treat them well, they treat you well in return. Instead, the better you treat them, the more they take it for granted. When Jiang Fuzhou came to request an audience, I was flying kites with the palace maids. But these kites weren't made of paper. They were guilty people tied to bamboo frames, screaming and cursing that the tyrant and the wicked empress would surely face divine retribution. It was quite amusing. The emperor enjoyed this game, laughing as he coughed. Jiang Fuzhou came to discuss the Shichu Palace. After returning from the border, he had become very enthusiastic about state affairs. He said that Shichu was suffering from famine and the treasury was short of funds, so the court shouldn't engage in large-scale construction. The emperor lazily replied, "Since the prince says not to build, then we won't build." I said, "The Shichu Palace is modeled after the ancient Fingyi Tower for the emperor's blessing. Is the prince dissatisfied with the Shichu Palace because he doesn't want the emperor to gain more blessings and longevity?" Jiang Fuzhou didn't look at me but knelt down and kowtowed, repeatedly saying he didn't dare. "You've led the army outside for many years and don't know the empress's temper. What she wants to do must not be stopped," the emperor said with a smile. "But the lives of the victims are at stake now." I interrupted him. "Now that the prince is highly regarded by the people, it's only natural for you to speak on their behalf. But don't forget, the most important thing in the world is not the people, but the emperor." Jiang Fuzhou remained silent for a long time before finally kowtowing again and saying, "Your subject takes his leave." With my keen senses, I naturally knew that as soon as Jiang Fuzhou and his group left the palace, they began cursing the tyrant and the wicked empress, saying that the country was on the brink of collapse. The ministers had always been fond of terrifying stories about me. They all tried to comfort Jiang Fuzhou, saying, "That wicked empress is just that cruel and willful. Forget the victims. When she first entered the palace, she demanded that the emperor dismiss his entire harem, 3,000 women, and she couldn't tolerate even one." Jiang Fuzhou didn't speak the whole time, but as he exited the palace, he suddenly staggered and spat out a mouthful of blood. Despite my relentless opposition to Jiang Fuzhou, the court was thrown into chaos. Eventually, he sent me a gift, requesting a private audience. The gift was 3,000 luminous pearls. Beihai is known for its pearls, but finding 3,000 pearls of identical size and luster is a rare feat. They were placed neatly in rows on black satin. For no reason, I recalled the time when, before Jiang Fuzhou left for Beihai, I held onto his sleeve, refusing to let him go. He patted my head and said, "Be good. Wait for me to return with plenty of pearls for you, to make jewelry and clothes, all right?" That was already 10 years ago. The Jiang Fuzhou standing before me had aged. Although he seemed to have meticulously groomed his hair and attire, even wearing the white long robe that I used to like most, the harshness of over a decade of war and turmoil had left him no longer the astonished young man beneath silk, nor the studious scholar by the Zhen River at dawn. Now, in middle age, he had a weathered face and an air of authority. Only the gentleness in his brows faintly reminded me of his younger self. He asked me, "Does your highness still like this gift?" Of course, the prince is thoughtful. I picked up one pearl. With such quality, it would have been a year's income for a wealthy family in Zhen River. I released the pearl, and with a crisp sound, it fell into the pond. This pond is called the Xingxingtang. On clear nights, you can see the shimmering reflection at the bottom, thanks to the luminous pearls worth 300,000 taels of silver lining the pond's floor each year. I raised my hand and pulled the black satin, letting the pearls fall into the water like raindrops. With these added, this year's Xingxingtang will surely shine even brighter. I thanked the prince in advance. Jiang Fuzhou stared at me, speechless for a long time, before finally saying, "Many of these pearls were ones I picked up during the battles in Beihai. Back then, I promised my wife to bring pearls home. Later, I took a blow for the Grand Commandant, a wound that cut across my shoulder. At that time, there was no medicine, no treatment. I clung tightly to those pearls, enduring. I thought I couldn't die. My wife, by sea, was waiting for me to come home. I thought to myself, if this were in the past, hearing such words would have made me cry. I would have thought how painful that wound across the shoulder must have been, how he managed to survive on a battlefield without any medical care. But now, I could only think, why didn't he just die on that battlefield? That way, I would have been spared so much pain. The days waiting for Jiang Fuzhou were unbearable. I often had nightmares, dreaming that he was injured, that he had died. Before he left, Jiang Fuzhou taught me those melancholic boudoir poems, which I found less interesting than sleeping in. But after he left, even a beast like me came to understand longing and sorrow. But what did he give me in return? Eventually, he returned triumphantly, seemingly unharmed, and had become a trusted confidant of the Grand Commandant. I was so excited, talking nonstop, while he kept drinking, cup after cup. He didn't bring me any pearls, only ordered a sumptuous feast from outside. I said we would never be apart again. I said, how about we have a child? I said, you've lost weight on the battlefield. Why not eat more now that you're home? However, I suddenly felt dizzy. Jiang Fuzhou held me, and I heard him whisper in my ear, "My lady, give me your horn, will you?" The current emperor suffered from heart disease. Before the age of 20, without the white rhinoceros horn as medicine, he would die. Without the horn, you would still be yourself, but you could save the emperor and save the nation. Give me your horn. The Grand Commandant promised me I would rise to the highest position, fulfilling my ambitions. I have lived for 300 years and have seen the most ferocious wolves and the most terrifying snakes, but nothing has ever scared me more than him at that moment. No. I gritted my teeth and took a step back. There was a knife on the table for cutting meat, and I stabbed myself with it. Blood gushed out, and the intense pain cleared my mind. I transformed into a beast with all 4 limbs and said, I would rather break my horn myself than give it to someone with a blackened heart. I ran through the streets and fields, with arrows raining down on me. I ran for my life until I had bled out completely. You don't know, you will never know how much it hurt. That conversation ended on a sour note. Jiang Fuzhou said to me, what happened back then is between you and me. Please don't bring suffering to the common people. I almost laughed at how he looked so concerned for the welfare of the people. I asked, Jiang Fuzhou, do you really care about the people? He nodded. Then I will slaughter every last one of them, I said with a malicious smile. I want to make sure you never get what you desire. The color drained from Jiang Fuzhou's face completely. When I returned, the emperor was half lying on the bed, waiting for me. It seemed he had just suffered another attack of his heart condition. Seeing me, he asked, how did the talk go? We talked about old times, and I threw out some harsh words. You should try to be gentler with him, the emperor said, looking out at the maple leaves outside the window. I'm afraid I won't make it until the snow falls this year. I won't be able to protect you anymore. I looked at him and recalled 6 years ago when I was brought before him. He was only 15 then, a pale and frail youth, draped in a bright yellow robe, looking up at me. The Grand Commandant was beside him, excitedly describing my rarity and marvel. His allies chimed in, almost forcing the young emperor to reward the Grand Commandant with higher titles. But he simply looked at me silently for a long time before asking, "Why do you have so many wounds?" I inflicted them on myself. Along with the old scars, there are 36 cuts in total, I replied earnestly. That sounds really stupid. A young emperor laughed. It seems you're not very good at being a divine beast, just as I'm not very good at being an emperor. I don't want to be a divine beast anymore. I sighed deeply. It hurts too damn much. They say if I eat your horn, my illness will be cured. But if my horn is gone, I won't be able to live either. What if I die because you want to live? He looked at me, puzzled like a child, and after thinking for a while, he said, "You make a good point." He was a reasonable emperor, so he didn't kill me. Instead, he often came to talk to me. Back then, he was still trying very hard to be a wise ruler, but everyone was shackling him, mocking him. I remember one late night, he came to see me, dressed in his night clothes, barefoot. I thought he had something to say, but he just stood at the cage door, tears falling silently. Jiang Fuzhou rebelled. In truth, it would have been more surprising if he hadn't. With his position at the top and his immense influence among the people, far exceeding that of the cruel and tyrannical emperor, it was inevitable. The emperor, coughing and laughing, said, Jiang Fuzhou really couldn't hold his temper. If he had waited until the lavish Western Chu Palace was built, then rebelled, it would have been much more justified. At that time, we had set up a copper pot, cooking mushrooms and tofu. The emperor kept saying he wouldn't live through the winter, so I ordered the palace staff to scatter some cotton outside the windows and place ice inside the room. We wrapped ourselves in cotton robes and drank hot soup. After all, winter is just like this. The emperor happily ate the steaming tofu while advising me, "Empress, Jiang Fuzhou is not an evil man. He's just too ambitious. When he sees an opportunity, he fights desperately to climb up, losing his way in the process, until he ends up going to extremes. You're making it too complicated. I can't understand." I mumbled as I chewed on a mushroom. "Don't forget, I'm just a beast." The emperor said, "Let me tell you something else. Back then, when the Grand Commandant found out you were the white rhinoceros and wanted to capture you, it was Jiang Fuzhou who begged him to spare your life. He promised to bring back the horn." "How do you know that?" The evidence of the Grand Commandant's years of corruption and factionalism was all handed to me by Jiang Fuzhou, his son-in-law. I had to understand his motives, didn't I? His wife died a few days ago. He refused to let her be buried in the Jiang family's ancestral tomb. He said that after his death, he wanted to be buried with his first wife by the Zhen River. I took a sip of hot soup and asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I like you. I've told you so many times," he said, coughing and laughing. I really do like you." He had said those words when he set me free, but I didn't take them seriously back then. After all, at that time, I was still just a beast lying in a cage. That day, he made two decisions. One was to set me free, and the other was to become a foolish emperor. When he opened the cage door, my body was covered in wounds. Though they had been treated, they still bled continuously. I was also poisoned, stumbling as I moved, but as long as I lifted my hoof, I could still crush this human emperor to death. At that moment, my heart was full of burning hatred. Yet, the young man raised his hand, gently touched my horn, and said, "You've suffered a lot, haven't you? From now on, I will repay you all the kindness that the world owes you." I asked, "Why?" "Because I really do like you," he said. "What kind of person would love a beast?" I looked at him, and the mountain-like weight of my body, just like the ice in my heart, slowly began to melt. I reverted to the girl by the Jun River, wearing simple clothes, but now weak and prostrate on the ground, unable to rise. He coughed as he reached out to help me up, asking, "From now on, I won't try to be a wise ruler, and you don't have to be a divine beast. Let's just have fun in this world." Jiang Fuzhou's army advanced unchallenged, and on the day the city fell, the emperor fainted. Everyone knew he didn't have much time left. He was muddle-headed, weak, and ruthless, but he was still so gentle and kind. Forgive Jiang Fuzhou and live a good life with him. This world is so much fun. You must keep enjoying it for me. I sat by his bedside, my tears falling onto the back of his hand. Oh, so even a beast can shed tears. When Jiang Fuzhou entered the palace, the ministers and eunuchs knelt to greet him, everyone except me. I sat alone at the dressing table in the Empress's palace, waiting for an inevitable conclusion. Jiang Fuzhou walked in, clad in armor and with a sword at his waist. From the mirror, I saw him standing behind me. "Eiji, don't be afraid. Now that I am king, you will still be the Empress. No one can harm you, and no one can separate us anymore," he said. "Eiji, I've often dreamed of you over the years, how you smiled at me by the Jun River, how you held onto my clothes, not letting me leave. We swore to be together forever, but when I woke up, you were gone." Looking into the mirror, I softly said, "The Emperor and I also swore to be together forever. We even worshipped the wild gods." He said, somewhat angrily, "Do you think that foolish Emperor really loved you? You were just an excuse for him to feign ignorance. His reputation as a foolish emperor cleared the court of traitors, and in the end, all of it fell on your shoulders. Eiji, the rules of this world are very complicated. You don't understand them. Indeed, I don't understand the ways of this world. I don't understand why someone who always smiled at me would want to cause me pain. I don't understand why someone who said they loved me would want me to die." I stood up and brushed past him. Many soldiers tried to stop me. "Are you going to leave me, Eiji? Don't force me," he said from behind me, his voice now carrying the authority of a king. "Tell me, where is that foolish emperor?" I turned to look at him, tilted my head, and smiled, just like a beast. I said, "Jiang Fuzhou, you've never seen me as a person." The sunlight broke through the dense clouds and shone on my face. This year, I turned 310, had endured many wounds, and loved someone. We beasts understand only the simplest logic. Those who are good to us are good people. Those who hurt us are bad people. I looked at him and said, "You are good to me, so I gave you my flesh. But later, you hurt me." A dagger, gleaming and sharp, plunged into his chest. I stared into his shocked eyes, enunciating each word. "I want you, for the rest of your life, to never get what you desire." The clouds gathered, and thunder rumbled as heavy rain fell that day. With the leader dead, the rebel army was in disarray, and the emperor was nowhere to be found. Because when he woke up, he was no longer an emperor. He was lying on the back of a giant beast, heading into the wilderness. No one knew what that beast was. It was as large as a mountain and as pure as jade, much like the white rhinoceros described in ancient texts, except it had no horn. He mumbled, "Why am I not dead? Could it be, did you give me your horn?" "So, what if I did?" I replied, panting as I ran. He thought for a moment and said, "It doesn't matter. I'll die with you." "My husband," I said, "I forgot to tell you, there's a little mistake in the human legends." "What do you mean?" "Without its horn, the white rhinoceros won't die, but it also won't cure any heart disease. It only makes the person and the white rhinoceros share the same lifespan." My husband smiled, relieved. "So, we can be together forever? Continue having fun in this world?" I laughed joyfully. "Yes. I've taken all the valuables from the palace, enough to last us decades of fun. After all, the court had already been cleansed by the foolish emperor's tyranny, and the disaster victims in Western Chu had been paid well for the construction of the palace. Whoever the next emperor would be, they would surely live in peace for decades. Great! Let's go back to Guling to watch the snow, and we can set off fireworks in the mountains. I squinted with a smile. So it turns out that the one who makes you smile is the one who loves you. Life is truly wonderful.